Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, and welcome back to the Mythic G'huun Healer Guide. Everything you need to know from a healer point of view, how to get the last boss in Uldir Mythic down. Starting off, at the very beginning of the fight, we do have the orb runners going out. Important mythic mechanic going out here is instead of having one side going, then another side going, and another side going to be able to get the re-origination blast together, you actually are sending off two groups at the same time that must dunk their orb within a few seconds of each other to be able to properly activate the re-origination blast. So at the very start, important to know that once you pick up the orb, you are no longer able to cast any abilities. So what I do is pre-place my feathers, grab the orb, walk over the feather, and jump into the Warlock Gateway. We have 4 Warlocks on this fight, so that way we can have a number of different runners who are able to go at the start of the encounter, like monks, for example. Even if they're not running out their mechanic, or not running out an orb at the start of the fight, they still want to run with that group, be able to place their Transcendent halfway through the trench run, and then be able to transcend up onto the platform halfway down the line, be able to pick up the orb from their partner who grabbed it from the conduit, and then be able to take the second Warlock Gateway to go dunk. You will have 2 trench runs per player over the course of this entire encounter. So we split up into 5 teams, and those teams would all just continue running throughout the course of the fight. If you check the angry assignments in the top right hand corner, it is extremely detailed as to what we're doing. So I'll be referencing this over the course of the fight, so always make sure to kind of keep that in mind as I'm going on. First phase is overall not too terribly complicated. Whenever you kill these Cyclopean terrors, they will pop out little G'huunies, and it'll work very similarly to the infested mechanic in Mythic Plus. The only difference is that they try to infest the player. And when they infest the player, they deal a nasty dot, and a disease is applied to them. You dispel the disease, and 2 G'huuns pop out. So we stack up, and we cycle through a bunch of Ring of Pieces to be able to keep them at bay and let the rest of the group still deal damage to them. I even take advantage of Shining Force, for example, as I'm trying to heal through the re-origination blast by dealing damage to small G'huun mobs. It's very helpful if you actually can knock some of them away to keep them off your group. But I also knocked them away to kind of delay their death, so I could deal more damage to them to continue healing when I had a big ramp up. As you enter into this, we called it Phase 2A, going into it because it's finally our opportunity to be able to deal damage to the boss. You have the bursting boils that are coming out. And this is a mechanic that took us an extremely long time to deal with, and this is why we have the angry assignments being so detailed. The first bursting boil that comes out, as you're seeing on the angry assignments, was Syrah and myself for the yellow group. We had 3 different people marking the blood boils into the group, and what we basically worked off of was general priorities of where they're going to mark. And we had basically a range right side group, a range left side group, and then like a melee group. So all 3 people, we had 3 designated people that were marking every time where you would be running to. And those people would be placing the markers down, and whoever's turn it was to soak was going to run to that marker to be able to soak up the blood boil. The blood boil works as follows. Whoever's standing closest to the blood boil gets a stack applied, just a pretty standard dot that's not too scary. If they receive 2 stacks of the dot, then they are immediately mind controlled and you have to kill them. So 2 dots come out from each boil. So the single boil that you stand next to is only going to apply 1 dot to you. So the only way that you can get multiple dots is if you're the closest target to multiple boils. You see there, Dr. J was the closest to 2 different boils, even though he was standing in the middle of the group because somebody missed their soak. And as a result, we had to kill him and deal with his very nasty disorient effect, right? So it's always very important to make sure you have pretty well fleshed out organization of who is going to be soaking, because we tried the YOLO strategy of whoever doesn't have a debuff go soak, and it did not work well for us. During these re-origination blast phases, the most important thing is actually just to not freak out. It's very tempting to burn lots of mana throughout the course of this, but often we would just make sure we're cycling through raid cooldowns. Early on, I would drop Barrier, for example, and the healers would spend a little bit of extra mana to get some support. And then I would just have my ramp up for the rest of it and be able to heal it no problem. And often we actually had healers just sitting there drinking and using potions of replenishment during it, because we would have a raid cooldown or, like I said, a disc ramp up or something like that, that would be able to take care of the lion's share of the healing required there. Because there are wide ranges between the blasts, or wide spaces between the blasts going out, often we were able to actually successfully heal through a lot of re-origination blasts just with a raid cooldown or 2. When we're dropping these stacks, always important that we are watching out for putting the Blood Feast down at the right location, getting in close to the boss when possible, when it was not our turn to soak blood boils, and when it was our turn, keeping our head on a swivel as you're seeing here, trying to look behind me, trying to find some area that's going to be close by, and again, making sure we're staying spread out for those blood boil stacks there. We made sure we had weak auras to be able to show when the next round is going to be coming up, as you're seeing in the top left corner. When it's the next round coming up, and you're able to have, we basically had everybody apply glow effects to the rounds that we were going to soak. So you would see specific glow effects for when it was my turn to soak, and then the other ones would be de-emphasized here. Whenever those large adds that are spawning from the Blood Feast die, they spawn a ton of small G'huunies, so it's always important to make sure you're jumping on those, cycling through Ring of Pieces, and we also try to focus on having a good raid cooldown cycle through those different locations. You can always look at the combat timer in the top left corner, along with my Exodus raid tools on the left side to show the specific timestamps for when we used all of our raid cooldowns. But the general basis was we wanted to make sure we had a good idea of where everybody was going to be moving to, when, and having a very fleshed out plan of who is doing a trench run when, and what kind of raid damage is going to be going out there. So people who are just coming back from a trench run, if they have the raid cooldown available, they can quickly get back to the group. That was something very important for them to be able to work through and be able to actually make sure we have a cooldown available. From here, when we entered into that collapse phase, just before the final phase of G'huun, we bounced between two different locations to bait out a lot of the damage going on. And this is always going to be the biggest pressure point. Everybody should have already had their potion of replenishment if they can get one. I sort of ended up having the short end of the straw because I was constantly healing through any of those re-origination blasts and didn't quite have time to be able to get the full mana pot that I wanted to, instead opting for a just a instant mana pot instead. So in some ways you have to make sure you're pacing your mana properly to be able to deal with it. And as you see, we still have the bursting boil mechanic that carried over from those phase 2A and 2B. And you're going to be having the malignant growth, which we know from heroic. So because this area puts you into basically pizza slices throughout this group, it's really important to make sure the healers are all spaced out properly. And we did a similar strategy to Mithrax, where we basically made another pentagon and had very strong emphasis onto specific healers. Specific healers would be like monks, for example, being closer to tanks. The tanks were closer to like the north side of the room where G'huun originally spawns from. Whereas the priests, for example, were on the entrance side of the room or the back side of the room to be able to deal with just healing everybody all at once. But a lot of times, especially if the Mistweavers were running low on mana, they would just then continue soothing and focusing onto the tanks. That was going to be more of their default role of when they started going because eventually everybody will go on this fight. They would eventually default to the tanks, whereas everybody else would be able to heal the rest of the group. And what I told the people, the range DPS that was split around my group, I told them, hey, I'm casting Powered Radiance on myself. So if you know where I am, you will receive healing. And we tried to keep it close spread of regional healing assignments, saying, all right, everybody in this area is going to be more your responsibility, and everyone in this area is going to be their responsibility. And this worked very well for us to be able to make sure people were staying alive. And in some cases, we used like very high defensives or immunities to be able to make sure we were soaking those bursting boils at the same time that malignant growths were going to be coming out. But eventually, you start hitting this 5 and 6 stack mark. All of the raid cooldowns should be expended before this point, because this is where everybody starts dropping off, or the last of your raid cooldowns should start being expended here. It's extremely important that you're not holding anything back and expending as much mana as possible. And eventually you will see this decision that I had to make. Instead of actually healing other people, I just opted to DPS the boss because it had gotten so low HP that it's very easy to have these 0.1 and 0.2% wipes. And we had many of those going throughout progression here. So important to make sure that you're keeping that in mind as you're going through this encounter, that the biggest healing challenge is going to be at the end of it, and you will really punish yourself if you go into that last phase with very low mana and unsustainable amounts of mana, that you're not going to be able to sit in the end encounter for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, attrition healing and focusing on triage healing the lowest health targets to not top them off, but keep them alive just a little bit longer. This fight did take quite a bit of time, so if you have any other kind of questions or specifics on different little parts of the fight or something that might be holding you guys up, feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. And be sure to check out the live stream. Of course, we'll be going through any of our Mythic Farm content as we're going on through the rest of Uldir. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop by the stream as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed the Mythic Uldir Healing Guide series. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you all next time.